You were Gresham's library, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, he got his second bid here, man.
Yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah, pretty proud of him.
I'm sorry you didn't get to actually debate.
Yeah, we'll take it.
Yeah. We'll take it.
Now he can remove his nail polish if he wants to. He was painting every one nail each every tournament and get a second bid at it.
Anybody not ready?
Go for it.
Can you see his face on there?
Yes, I can. We're good?
Before I start, I would like to say that we do not endorse anything that be constructed as ableist language within the discourse of our one-D authors and have made a conscious attempt to remove any language predicated off that privilege. So contention one is my story. When I joined debate, I was told I would become a better speaker. I used debate to improve my English skills and communicate with others and economically engage with them. It's ESOL all over there, learning how to assimilate into society builds rejecting. When I graduated ESOL and got that artistic activity as a game society, I engaged debate as compared to win all and beat my opponents. You do not know who the coup brothers are. You only know Centennial, KK, a team people point to and say, oh, look at those Koreans. So learning how to debate so well and learning and working hard to win tournaments. It's my hard work and my country sleeping nights and assimilating to a traditional form of the way has turned me into a model minority. But now since my senior years, I have a resolution that teaches us how to engage other people. Looks like my career has come full circle. This year, I started learning how to engage people, now it's time to give it back. This year, I choose to engage who I am. Through my experience with the diverse team, Daryl, brushing exposed to non-traditional arguments, thus contented two issue resolution. Korean immigration has been kept a secret in Mexican history. Forced slavery and hostility caused immigrants to suffer as foreigners in a foreign country. That is civilian 12-7. Is part of Mexican history kept a secret. Hundreds of Koreans as forced slavery and hostility. They can never imagine suffering. They will be forced to humiliate. But now his grandparents tell them Mexico different with hard labor. This hands really he talks about grandparents living and suffering in a foreign country. Those who refuse to work or beings. What's your last name? If there's no last name, so we all change our name. Now these slaves represent the myth of the model minority. Through the Yankee and Korean immigrants were recognized as the best worker, but excluded and treated like brutes due to the INA. That's changed in 2005 when the left their home for a strange country. The most responsible 30 Koreans. Not one will see the beautiful mountains under the river's home country ever again. The first Korean immigrants Latin American nicknamed adequate and cactus. Japanese slaves here to Sky came to coach on the same Koreans to work on sugar cane plantation. They also led slaves to cactus plantations and factories. They live the wider lives worse than those of brutes, but their diligence earned their reputation as the best workers. So much so they're given the nickname adequate. But the story is the same throughout the entirety of history. The narration of America is different by Asians. They face a unique form of discrimination. One that excluding the great them was kept silent through the myth of the mind, and that is time to stop exclusion from legal and political participation. Immigrants have time not just in prison or victimized. This polls for the non Chinese immigrants. All Chinese immigrants detained as substance until the claims of the 20th century were verified with intent to cross examination. The feeling of this polls reflects the culmination of discriminatory practice. Stories of the period resonate with the degradation and despair. The experience of early Chinese immigrant pride in the context where all Asian immigrants, because other Asian immigrants encountered similar violence. Koreans thought that immigrants were that pro-white anti-Asian reaction by retaining their old ways. They tried to overcome discrimination by additional some of the Chinese and Japanese become a little more westernized. Despite these efforts, like immigrants to westernized and be accepted, they were treated by white immigrants as merely different strains of the same yellow parrot. The 1970 federal national decided to permit only free white persons to become nationalized. Following the 14th Amendment, Asians became the only group ineligible for citizens, with 99 Asians running classifying aliens in two groups, one illegible and those ineligible citizens. Prior to basis of state discrimination and classification for states to pass statutes that were racially discriminated, thus to equal protection challenge. Many states took advantage. Asians placed in secular schools. Asian Americans were denied quintessential rights, such as the right to own property, the right to choose one private. Few people know that Asian Americans challenge mental legally established schools. To counter that, Asian Americans have not faced discrimination. To challenge the myth that Asian Americans are a passive model minority. Asian Americans' contribution to the civil rights movement have largely been ignored. The federal election ultimately had a profound impact on their psyche and the development of the Chinese American community. Hundreds of immigrants were detained from us. Asian life was similar to Chinese escape food. The detainers were treated like animals, commodities, forced to live in squalid ground floors. I'm still bound the president, still proud by the president today, retired with Asian Americans as aliens. Those who not belong here, those presidents not society. We must recognize that early Asian Americans were brave enough to cannot do no less. Now, the play continues today. The experience of Chang Robert have demonstrated oppression against Asians. The only way to solve it is to let people know. As Chang Kuchim-sam, I'm a second generation Korean without any achievements in life. I was just a label worker, a farm worker. I was told about engaging in non-traditional legal scholarship when they hurt my job process. I think about it making more stop me when I try to return my valid license. Well, not good enough to let me return. He asked me what my passport was. I imagine the phone company forced to make the embarrassing outfit. They told my law firm that I could not be at work until I prove that I belong. I've been an alien. Things have happened since like the time I was referred to service at a service station or the time I was stopped in New Jersey for suspicion of stolen vehicle. 4 big white police against one small Asian man. Perhaps they're afraid I might know martial arts. I cannot even one word sorry. No matter how hard it goes, it's not complete. No matter how hard I try, I can never be as good as everyone else. I can never be white. I'm Tyler Silence. And so now, they're after bar society, presence minorities believed by hostility and discrimination. They're locked between inclusion and alteration. And an unjust state of the nation that promises to realize dreams that is preference to that time. The minority people struggle with the enterprise of gaining stuff in the minority community, characterized different cultures, some stories of hostility, over discrimination, youth and violence, usually population records, exclude game leaders, find out entering a social content, inclusive and disparate population, separate from the child's prior race and language, locked in position somewhere between inclusion and alteration, between dominant and disorderly. Not to mention the people just leading things. Seems partly unjust in the nations like the United States, whose diversity is so great and whose ideals promise are possibly to realize dreams for all. Without this manifestation of the minority, portraying Asian Americans solely as hardworking others, without the exposure of the place, may people present and become unsympathetic to Asian Americans. This has 3 implications. 1, that the oppression of Asian American communities. 2, that Asians are used to justify the oppression of other minorities. Now, 3 is that Asians are perceived as oppressed by other minorities. When in reality, that is not true. That is Chang Kuchim-sam. This history of discrimination was given by portrayal of minority Asian Americans are portrayed as hardworking and talented without belief in the minority laws justify ignoring the unique discrimination faced by Asian Americans. The portrayal of parents in the general public to ignore the needs. You'll find important race minority from large to become a loss of respect. The minority has become a largely unquestioned self in current social reality. reality. One can see the label as a tool of oppression, which one denies existence of present-day discrimination against Asian Americans. Two, it legitimizes the oppression of other racial minorities. The misgains substantial violence both inside and outside the Asian American community. The misquoted audience unsympathetic to the problems of Asian American. The human part of resentment. Providing violence tells the reaction of the literature class. Outspoken Asian American writers. One student that she was offended by his militant approach. Surely some of these other writers have not been justified for militant. Have they been offended but failed to express their feelings? To my surprise, they were not offended by animal black American Chicano Native writers. They understood the anger faced by blacks in Chicago. They emphasized with the Native Americans, but the Asian Americans made me angry because I even know that Asian Americans felt oppressed. The bottom line is the oppression of Asian Americans to be outside without social service. The dedicated Asian Americans succeed. Officials have denied funding for social service programs. College administration have excluded Asian Americans from education opportunity programs. Japanese American men earn incomes compared to those of white men, but they only do so by acquiring more education. The income disparity from other Asian Americans are more. Now, Asian American family the more organs of household. Wage disparity become inherent. Geographical cases consider the misfortune of dual harm by hurting other racial minorities and poor whites who are blamed for not being successful. African American Latinos were as a whole. That those Asians, anyone can make in the country. This blame is justified by the mere criteria to prove out Asian Americans. We are complicit in the oppression of other racial minorities. This blame creates resentment against Asian Americans among African American Latinos and poor whites. The bottom line serves like convenient scapegoats. As Korean Americans in Los Angeles discovered during the riots, many Korean Americans now themselves as human shield, caught between the white majority and the black minority. Bottom line remains established their racial hierarchy, denies the oppression of Asian Americans. Thus, Gabe and I advocate for a process of conscientization in order to interrogate the United States federal government's economic engagement towards Mexico. Contention 3 is said conscientization. We often compellingly participate in debate without ever considering the possibility for how debate can change the world. How the critical thinking and research skills developed can provide meaning, advanced methodology to liberate press groups, often within our own social occasion. Our speech have focused on the epistemological growth that occurs from activity and the development of the critical consciousness. Because debate becomes more than just a game or a process of life leading to conscientization. That is Octas in 2007. The fact that young Asian Americans from the classic political acting family find themselves activists speaks a real possibility that young people will become critical content politically active. Their active involvement is no order, given the political mastership of the right them. So student activists and trying to speak out. Asian Americans gone against the grain, become politically involved. They realize the politics of racial, where their tendency towards people believe that there is hope for the future. The common practical factors contribute to the development of critical consciousness. Now, U.S. economic engagement, as well as when you choose to discuss the economic engagement policy, neglects the presence of the Asian identity. Our critical examination of this year's policy question raises our consciousness about how we Asians exist and perceive the world. That creates real change. Also, in 2007, conscientization, being able to name the world meaningful education, versus direct and understand the impact of social and force of press of life. The process of conscientization involves the concept of clarification. What we're within us, what we about in the world, the pros recognition of the world as given the world, the world dynamically in the making. Such recognition inspires people to work against pressure, begin their active efforts to transform the world. Naming the world was important steps to actively changing it. Now, every single round is key to the development of Asian American critical consciousness. That's also achieved in 2007. Asian Americans have continued to develop Asian American critical consciousness, becoming the world social state. Experience learning activity combining personal active work reflection can help move students towards an Asian American critical consciousness. Now, our performance is critical. Debate has critical elements that contribute to conscientization that must be endorsed for effective social change. Also achieved in 2007. Critical elements contribute to conscientization. Importance of obtaining information to understand lives and shape lives, social forces. Important moments in education, key social story made a difference. Schooling has not talked about the racial or the Asian American experience. Inspired by experience of other Asian Americans struggle over conditions. The commitment to Asian American patients was deep in when transfer understanding into action. Research, extend knowledge, and learn from efforts to make change. Finally, conscientization occurs when discrete elements work in combination. It's not a purely intellectual experience, absent social elements. Instead, multifaceted interrelated experiences reinforce each other. For active thinking to raise critical conscious Asian Americans, success, substantive content to lay the economy founder as to several people themselves in relation to the world. There's a value and need to offer a range of experience across the community. Breaking from binding constructs that pit academic programs against student life heavily. Conscientization arises when people are exposed and combine lessons learned from a variety of sources.
Why is winning a debate necessary to develop Asian consciousness?
Because winning a debate endorses our performance.
Okay, why is that necessary to develop Asian consciousness?
Because we say that's a good thing. Asian American critical consciousness, how Gabriel and I perceive the world, how we engage people through debate rounds. If that is something good, it should be affirmed.
Oh, right, I understand that, but why is winning this debate round necessary for that?
What do you mean, why is winning this debate round necessary for that?
What is the impact of the ballot?
Well, the ballot says who did the better debating.
Okay,
If
cool.
the process of conscientization is good, we did the better debating, we should win.
Awesome. So why does the story at the beginning of the 1AC, like what does that have to do with the arguments about Korean immigration in Mexico?
Korean immigration in Mexico is how we relate to the resolution. The narrative is our performance and how we relate to the breaking down of the model minority myth.
Okay, cool. So what is the Neg supposed to say to a narrative?
What is the Neg supposed to say to a narrative?
Hmm?
They're supposed to engage the narrative. They could say that the
Yeah, what do you mean by
false.
engage the
They
narrative?
could say that the narrative is bad. They could represent...
Oh, so you want me
they
to
could
say that
possess-
your narrative is bad?
You could say something about the narrative or some way that we portrayed it is inaccurate or has
Is
bad
inaccurate?
ramifications.
How
You
am I
could
supposed to
propose
say that
a-
your experiences were
You could
inaccurate
propose
or your
a counter
experiences?
narrative. You could engage with a different methodology.
Well, the question
All these
here-
Well, then-
possibilities
okay,
are
then my
different.
question about a
so
counter-
the question here is that it's not about the narrative, it's about our methodology, which is conscientization. We use
Yeah.
the narrative through our method of conscientization. So,
So
you have
why
the
is your narrative key to
conscientization.
endorsing that methodology then?
It's not key. We're just saying that's how we endorse our methodology. There's
Okay,
other ways
so-
to embrace conscientization. The
Okay.
narrative is our way.
Huh. Okay, well then I actually got everything I needed.
say that.
It's going to be too often in the case on one page.
Yeah, that's how it works.
Okay.
It's really cool. I guess that's a big compliment.
You guys both got it?
Yep.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Anybody not ready? All right.
First off, the topicality, the affirmative team should have to defend the enactment of a topical plan in the environment. The affirmative should defend some increase in the United States federal government economic engagement with Cuba, Mexico, or Venezuela, and its most predictably agent and verb indicated debate about a hypothetical government action that there. And 3, each topic consists an agent doing the acting U.S. The U.S. should adopt a policy agent, and the subject verb action should adopt means to put a policy in action. 3, government means the specific direction of a limitation. The action desired the entire debate is about whether something ought to occur, and our interpretation facilitates productive debate. Public policy states this point ensures accessibility and negative ground. This facilitates clash without ways changing the topic post facto. Structurally favors the ethics and manipulates the balance of prep. Strategic fairness is vital to a well-prepared opponent. Topical fairness requirements are key to effective dialogue, monopolizing strategy, and prep makes a discussion one-sided and subverts any meaningful neg role. That's Galloway's 7. Debate is dialogue is set by topic requirements. When competitive equities are it denies the person of the other participant. This is a fundamental condition of dialogue. Far from being a banal request for links of fairness, the demand for respect. The months of preparation must not be on the subsequent fairness and exclusion strategy. One side come able to participate, debate the competence for the extensions of word of offering a framework that maintains quality for the sake of the conversation. Mind then neither the state action nor the claim to germane the topic. The to subverts any meaningful role to the neg, undermining the value of exchange determinants and substitution for simple topical action. Dialogical benefits and a general subject isn't enough. Debate requires a specific point of difference. Our vision of debate inculates advocacy skills, which outweighs their impact. This time, bringing freely aid debate is a meaning of setting differences. There must be a conflict of interest, divergence, and agreement. There is need of debate. A controversy is when there is no clash of debate. Debates can't produce effective decisions without clear identification. The question general audience may be occur with broad take of immigration. How many do that take? Sure, they can think of the concerns. Debate is not going to be productive without focus on particular question. Demarcating sides controversy may be stated clearly. The vague understanding results in unfocused deliberation, poor decision, and evidence by the failure of the Congress to make progress on immigration. Someone different might observe public schools are terrible. We ought to do something about it. Birds express frustration by focusing on their discussion. They can agree about the start state of education without finding points of clarity and solution to gripe session will follow, but the precise questions, more profitable discussions opened up by me. That was simply by placing a focus on the search for a concrete solution. The productivity which facilitates effective decision making using limits on the decision base for argument should be clear to find. And if we meet merely talk about homelessness or crime, we were likely to have an interesting discussion about profitable argument. And the state resolved that the pen is mightier than the sword is debate, but yet fails to provide basis for clear argumentation. Although we have a general subject, still too broad. The basis for argument can be phrased into a debatable position. Not to say debate should be completely avoided. An interpretation that a good debate can occur for competing interpretations of the controversy. In fact, these sort of debates are maybe very engaging. The point is that debate is best facilitated to focus on a particular point. And next off is our counter-advocacy. He method I advocate an interrogation, the myth of the model minority present, the history of the United States federal government economic engagement toward Mexico. Our counter-advocacy does not endorse the use of personal narratives or autobiography performed by the one I see. The net benefits will be the case turns the counter-advocacy solved. They have no defense of their use of personal narratives in the context of conscientization. We also consider how debate can change the world, and we can advocate methodology to oppress people. We recognize the presence of agent identity, often aligned by our discussion of economic engagement. The process of raising concern to how agents exist and see the world would activate the same consciousness process and turn commodification, training autobiography for the valid commodified one's experiences,
That's on the case.
Oh, on the case, yeah. Turn commodification, training autobiography, or the valid commodifies one's experience and has limited impact on the culture. Would once attempting to reform a narrative wins it subverts its own radical intention by becoming an exemplar of the very culture indictment. This turns our model minority arguments called 95 autobiographies as lucrative commodity members of personal stories or claims by journals of press have been eager market outside narratives no matter and unrelated records of performance transforms into itself of property and money and education and the value of intellectual asset and the academy is required and members to publish military capital research and outsiders splendid record and sufficient evidence in support of their endeavor while success autobiography to the success of the limited impact on culture transformative outsiders author the success stories subverts outside radical intention by constituting the minutes exemplar person to one contemporary culture. What does this transformation do for that culture where less fortunate they seem content and then turn autobiography is easily co-opted by liberalism. Autobiography is the practice of liberal autonomous subject par excellence. The same notion of liberal subject has its argument responsible for the Western concept of conquest of the world. Even if their best intention is to resist a liberal subject, autobiography is understood by its consuming audience as the assertion of the classical autonomous subject that subverts the political potential of performance by writing one's experience intelligible to the terms of the audience. Call for 95. Contrary to the claim that personalized discourse and influences along with distinct experience of those who participate in discourse work in a common way to reflect their membership in the culture devoted to liberal values to practice for writing by one's own self-reflexive belief in the autonomous individual which occurred here little Western man has been animated by the intellectual colonizing human intelligence was not their own autobiographical performance to celebrate the Western ideal of individualism because appears to read a fascination with self-attention and uniqueness as individual privileged by liberal theory. Autobiographical discourse a coopted instrument of social reform by affirming that the individual success autobiography produces the structure that attends such success. The autobiography deflects attention from collective responsibility toward development, collective solution for the eradication of race and sexist harms. Her story will solicit the public's attention to the life of one individual and appropriate her desires about the need of a collective autobiographical discourse override right through authority attention even when the autobiography determines to resist liberal ideology represents her life story as a occasion to announce an alternative political theory that relents on individuals and generates subordinates. Her political critique, the personal narrative engrossed the reader's imagination, fascinated by travels into times of the self-readers who constitute text, observation, all links, and matter of recipe of the author's personality. She inevitably reproduces herself as the character with whom culture is well acquainted. The autobiographer who desires material benefit from the performance must adopt a persona that is intelligible, if not enticing to her audience. Narrative to capitalize on rather than some protagonist that serve the values of liberalism, and they collapse all politics into the personal appeals to personal experience, replace analysis of group oppression with personal testimonies. Rural politics become a policing operation. Those not in an identity group are denied intellectual access, and those within the group who do not conform to the F terms are excluded. Over time, this strategy limits politics to only the personal. This devastates culture. A structural change and turns the case to demand that political performance assimilate to the very norms of experience. At Scott 92, the way to practice against that perceived treatment is to take the mantle of the victim. Everyone whether an insulted minority or perpetrator of the insult, he is being unjustly accused now claims to be an equal victim. We not only have an extreme form of individuality, but conception of individuals that identity. There's nothing wrong facing with the teaching individuals about how to is each other's pain. There's been an erosion of the politics of collectivity through reformulation, difference in individual terms. The personal political has been recrafted to personal. The political is personal. All politics is collapsed into the personal questions of individual behavior, lifestyle, state, and for political analysis of socials. Individuals are generalized or perception claim to speak for the whole group. The groups are conceived unitary references to structure implied in explicit personal testimony. Oppression replaces analysis of the identity group is taken as authority for one's speech. Direct experience becomes the only test of true knowledge. The exclusion implication are twofold. All those not of the group are denied intellectual access to it, and those within the group must experience do not conform to the established terms of identity must either suppress their views or drop out an experience and appeal to experience foreclose the discussion turns politics into policing operation. The borders of identity are patrolled for signs of non-conformity. The test of membership of the group becomes one less willingness and engage in specific political action than one's ability to use prescribed links that are taken as signs and inherently of the group. Mimics of politics of power naturalizing, deeming it discernibly objective facts that prerequisite for inclusion of any group with strong insistence on any inclusive relationship between group identity and access, especially objects of simultaneous refusal and limitation of the power. And personal experience isn't bad for debate, but debate is bad for personal experience. It forces you, the judge, to render the value of a person's intimate and many times traumatic experiences epistemically violent and turns the case as Butler 1. Narrative governance may foreclose upon ethical resource and accessibility of limitation, no ability others to hold a personal account for disorder. Life in narrative forms required a falsification of life and the name of that things would regard someone to tell the story. The reason why her life has been taken to the path has been declared. Autobiography remains to be they prefer the seamlessness of the story. We want to call the truth of person in the name of fact that would require another to do violence to herself in front of us. It's a way in which we are in or about charity and not fully recoverable towards the case where we ethically implicated in lives. The point is not to celebrate notion of incoherence, but only to consider our own coherence and since radical but non-totalizing and establish the way we are implicated. We must say the self must be narrated, and the only narrative itself can be intelligible to survive. The I who makes such utterances will be besieged precisely by what it disavowed. So since I cannot tell the story in straight lines, I lose my thread. I start again. I forget something crucial. The I is no longer imparting a narrative to a receiving other. The I finds that in the face of the other, it is breaking down.
Topicality. Your only impact is debatability in that ground. Am I correct?
Well, those are internal links to our Steinberg and Freely.
But those are your only internal links, right?
As of the one I'm
without defending a topical plan, that makes being neg impossible, am I correct?
Not necessarily impossible, but just less productive.
Okay, why the hell did you flip neg then?
Why did we flip neg? Well, I mean, we have a strategy. Our argument, however, is that first, there's a good turns the case argument that if the 1AC were rooted in topical action, it would be better for inculcating change, so this is arguably like a critique. Secondly, we just we want to win the debate.
Topical.
So we would do that if we were neg.
Okay. So.
It's not that it's impossible to neg, we have a good strategy too. It's just that it's more productive.
So this strategy, how did you interrogate the myth of the model minority?
We just agree with that part of the 1AC.
You just, how do you perform a breaking down of the myth of the model minority? What do you think that is?
We will impact turn the idea that to agree with the 1AC, we have to directly perform it. Our Scott evidence says that only turns politics into an identity policing operation.
We never told you to directly perform what we did. How do you two personally break down the myth of the model minority?
We don't need to. We agree with that part of it and just think that your narrative is not intrinsic.
How does agreeing break down the myth of the model minority?
I'm sorry?
If you agree with the F, why not vote F right now?
Because we disagree with the part of the F that introduced a narrative. That's enough reason to vote down.
Okay, so my question, in a performative debate, how do you perform the breaking down of the myth of the model minority?
It doesn't have to be a performative debate. We have impact turned that idea.
Alright, so...
I guess every speech is a performance, but your performance was bad because it
what is commodification?
Commodification. Yes. Hawthorne evidence says Writing an autobiography for the ballot commodifies your identity. Our evidence is written in the context of law reviews where people would always start out by saying,
And
this is how, I'm sorry?
And how does voting negative not commodify our identity if the ballot is used to reject
Well, you
our
were the one who
identity?
introduced your identity in the space of a captive audience. You chose the plot and characters of your story. You said the only impact of the ballot was to vote for the team who did the better debating. So you chose your story based on what would make the judges think you were better than us at debating. We think that that is commodification of your experience.
Okay, so why is voting neg not commodification also?
Why is it commodification?
Because you are rejecting the narrative and the performance of the 1AC.
I mean, it's
You
sort of a
said
form
commodification is weighing, giving something value. That has already happened, and that is going on right now. What is the uniqueness for commodification?
The uniqueness for it doesn't really matter that much. You should just vote neg to reject the narrative politics of the 1AC. Our political praxis is better.
All right, so this part, you said that we have a Western notion. Oh, you have a question?
What's the alternative to using our identity?
What do you mean the alternative to using our identity? Yeah, like the historical investigation is great.
Yeah, where do you do that?
Where do we do that? When we agree with that part of the 1AC?
When you agree with that part of the 1AC. Okay. So, what is the status of the advocacy?
I guess conditional.
Okay.
Didn't really think of it.
I'm saving it.
You know, actually, I'm going to say no to that because our topicality argument is like procedural and it's about the terms of the debate. So unconditional. Is that okay?
We'll debate that out.
Okay, sure.
Gabe, you good?
Yeah, I'm giving them.
Okay, cool.
Let's go through this. Order is going to be case, the counter-advocacy framework.
There you go.
We're ready? The English state team have conceded that conscientization is good for the debate to win. It's the only framing in this round. It's a matter of who gets through that conscientization. First, they have not read a single piece of code that Asian Americans should not go through a process of conscientization or whether a commodification can turn that conscientization. Conscientization is naming the world who we are in this world in relation to the world. It is an internal process that cannot be co-opted. It's only me and Michael that are going through a process of conscientization. We will say that Stratford and so is not going through a process of conscientization, which means they should lose the debate right now. Trading out of my words is not necessarily a bad thing. Just because we present identity does not mean in fact this argument is functionally saying us to shut up and not tell anything about our identity. He has not provided alternative mechanism for going through conscientization. Counter-advocacy is just a reapportionment. It does not do anything to solve the problems of these statistical. Also, a unique frame is that we are co-opted right now. We are advocates for the United States federal government. And political politics is only concentrated on that issue. Just conscientization is breaking away from the traditional war, which means that there is no unique impact for these commodification terms. Also, losing is not the answer to the commodification. Commodity is something you can buy or pick. If you think our performance, our commodity is a good thing, you can still buy it and vote for it. Now, leaders of a beautiful struggle prove that we do not get co-opted. Posted in 12 preferred participants who end up being potential leaders of open critical white supremacy call for changing openly debate. And two of my participants are involved in volatile group called leaders of a beautiful struggle. We are essentially want to change through government policy. Actually, LBS to develop platform regarding job education and incarceration, many other issues to training my participants. Because now after training for a real world, now empiricism is on our side. Leaders of a beautiful struggle, training debate, to engage in the process of conscientization of your social location, motivation, inspiration to create active social and radical change within our community. Adam proves the motivation, debate, fosters, gay, and variety. On 2011, my name is Adam Jackson. I'm the executive vice president, leaders of the beautiful struggle. I'm a policy debater. That still where my experience comes from, my expertise. That's where I got involved in LBS. I learned a lot of the world I live in. Want to get me involved in the group. Now, Dave proves the spillover effect of policy debate, experience to community activism through the personal experience. Reading content in 2011. My name is Dave. I'm president of the development. We want to use policy debate experience to help the community develop. Now, Denver proves critical thinking that debate fosters to provide a voice for those on scene largely disenfranchised by the public. This is the writing con 2011. My name is Derek Murray. I debated a group involved where I started a debate policy at the highest level of competition. People that are policymakers and people who don't even see all the group do not think about the way in situation that things that we want to change. We want to bring policy to young people. Now, Lawrence also proved that necessary to challenge traditional norms to ensure that those skills are transferable. Reading con 2011. Hi, my name is Lawrence Grandry. I am a vice president research for leader of a beautiful. I wanted to critical style of the way it's about seeing politics as a game and try to weigh and not make it about connection to your personal or your social justice. You can mark the card there. Now, silence is not the answer. Dr. Crenshaw 97. Total silence sustained ideological white privilege. Honestly, the measure of silence surrounding whiteness are key political tool for protecting our privilege. Silence is not active, not passive. Your absence speaks about whiteness. You can find exclusive discursive silence, silence, civilized hierarchy. Surely now they say we are co-opted by liberals. That was the answer about conscientization is an internal process and cannot be co-opted. Also, this is the debate community there. Concerning context of the public and non-specific about debate or agent or conscientization, which should be the framing of debate. Who in this debate community is going to co-opt us? Debate is about epistemology growing. It is a valuable activity that all of you in this room will agree that debate is valuable. If that's true, you are not going to co-opt us. You cannot stop us from reading a 1AC and go through a process of conscientization. Now, they say we collapse politics to a personal and identity. We have impact here that our argument in the 1AC. Also, we do not necessarily that politics just collapses into also debate should not overlook the potential of the first person narrative record. And AMO 2001, the potential first person narrative must not look to be overlooked. Today's debate community narrative often offer different debaters an opportunity to emphasize the oppressed vote, the rhetorical possibility of creating intersection of minority advocates through the unprecedented narrative, rhetorical possibility as forced to get a popular chain in the community. The narrative could be accepted against traditional rhetorical create identification to reality figures. Now they say debate is bad. Debate is bad for our identity. No, it's not. This is a price of prey where we are constantly clarification who we are. That's the Osajima card. They do not have in context in the card of debate. Just because we talk about identity does not mean to get commodified. Also, leaders of a beautiful struggle card answer above. Now go into counter-advocacy. He meant you cannot solve for conscientization. You are the model minority. You are debate. You're just trying to reappropriation our entire 1AC by reading a counter-advocacy text that is only 15-second long and saying that, yeah, we go through a process of conscientization by agreeing what have you done in this debate, what have you done in the community to perform that you are not the myth of the model minority. Also, the logic of whiteness is that you can just take the 1AC and skirt it to the discussion of that leads to a mentality where we do not really talk about a discussion rates that was impact on the case also, you do not break down the myth of the model minority. Commodification does not break down, you do not break down the myth of the model minority, and the commodification doesn't mean we don't break down the myth of the model minority. Argument reliability, this is where the conditionality and contradiction arguments are going to come in. The Neg needs to be liable for the representation they bring in for debate. Contradiction, sustain rates, and not going to increase in 95 whether or not the content one whiteness and contradiction whiteness they go to maneuver around the challenge and space it to be uniform, particularly for the social identity and different permutation. We can go through a process of conscientization and a process of conscientization to understand identity. It's not should be not a part of the political realm. Also, they put up a form of disconnected objective narration where they do not have the epistemological connection or connection to what they are talking about. This leads to the ultimate form of commodification because you can just talk about things and pretend that you are actually involved in it without actually doing. Now, go on to the framework argument. Go on to the framework argument. First is conscientization is crucial. Crucial and is the best form for this debate. The knowledge obtained from the ethics crucial to make the debate meaningful for Asians. Myth has rendered Asians out the whole power and pedagogical growth from the debate is necessary. We are a prerequisite political politics. Seeds to the right leading to Asians and a sea of apathy, political activity, trigger only by the further that's also my efforts, not the death of resolutional debate. The resolution will continue to strive by our conscience will not develop, uniquely keep to develop who we are while other policy rounds solve for their education. Debate is ESL. I'm losing my identity. Some resolution that tells me to forget who I am is the white, telling me that I have to assimilate, telling girls to get out of telling that we don't need welfare education. This perpetuates the psychological violence against Asian American. Now, framework is the myth of the model minority Asians are told diverging from the north will hurt our ability to get jobs in the future and be accepted by whites. That's a China evidence. I will never blame white no matter how hard it goes to white China. Similar that plan focus, skip to centrism, textualism, discourage active politics, and promotes Western knowledge. Conquered in 2002, people are driven reading that fail to know the other form of active politics, contemplative performance, market, observer, limited, skip to central hallmark, Western imperialism, academic blessing, assume that the world's texts are talking with regulatory power, state and support, people experience literacy, it's been a control of the free party, passport, the power of law has been on the first on the back of Salati, textualism used to be exposed, transcription is not politically interested, modifying, engaging, brutal metaphor, the supremacy of Western knowledge, now the framework is controlled by the white supremacy, rejected, shown in 2004. The framework that dominates policy and announcing and implemented power who are open and white male without making mainstream research can be characterized as subject to objectivity and triple that something share the same relationship to the social environment possible. So widely accepted a lot of policy analysis assumes its fashion instead of willfully ignores the political nature of all recent policy analysis grounded in their over instrument view of rationality masquerades and a lot of policy leads to protect analysis of planted and neutral when they are actually tied to a prevailing relations power. Also, you cannot claim any of your fairness that you had flipped neg, which means you had a strategic assessment and you should have had prepared to be debating negative this round. Yell should know that discussing immigration policy is economic engagement militarily no day. Highly violate legislation called immigration policy very important that discriminatory important different policy with analysis not to say aggregate legislation that paper contribute to a larger research tradition that seeks to explain what economic engagement such an immigration now resolve includes debate of OED 89% different that should means criticism to the Oxford 2005 you include obligation which criticized should have been careful. Now debate is not policy making. We must challenge whiteness. Dr. 97 contractual whiteness on unnamed political academic public discourse return back to the critical ideological necessary to make whiteness available. Return to science culture locate interactive with power whiteness and focus explicit terminology not debate uniquely traditional rhetorical artifact which is a direct public class about race and political discourse to active about race and how the invention of race gender and class enter the public argument. Permutation goes through a process of conscientization to engage in a plant-based debate. Now counter-interpretation, we should have a discussion of the topic and one that allows us to examine the history of how nations are made and all made. That's the only way to that does not preclude policy action and also provide the research base that they claim to have. Now limits our reasonability of world community interpretations of race debate in favor of which purpose we should provide interpretation that slightly varies the moral hazard which is the reason why you should provide individual forms. Now their limits and ground argument rhetorical imperialism limits justify certain knowledge to exist without language constraint perpetuate past file which is impacted by a concrete the switch side debate argument they will make it and we are the people switch side because our passing game with plan-based debate means that we have already gained that education.
So how are we unable to break down the model minority or the model?
Dude, your counter-advocacy text is literally we agree with you. What process of conscientization is that? What
yeah, so then how does it make it different from you guys breaking it down?
First, the whole 1AC is our performance. The way we performed it is good. Our first link would be your contradiction running framework and then saying conscientization that we have to be limited down to this resolution and then say we have to grow epistemology. That's two contradictory things. That's a bad form of epistemological growth. Second is these identity bad arguments. We say that our identity is tied to our social location. The only people who can transcend our identity and pretend that they're like not part of anything are the white supremacists who use contradictions and use these type of shifty notions.
Okay,
to get
kind of on that. So you called He-Man a model minority. Like, why? How is He-Man the model minority?
He-Man's, we're just saying that you as Stratford SO is just taking the myth of the model minority as a joke, not engaging the case. That's the fact
we're
that you're
taking it as a joke.
There's no alternative to commodification. You say that we shouldn't use our identity. What's the alternative?
And you think that gives you the right to
so
I'm a model minority?
Yeah.
We would we are challenging that you are upholding the model minority.
Talking at a personal level, calling He-Man a model minority. Well, like gives you the
dude.
right
That's the tag of the argument. We should say that you are not breaking down the model minority. The counter-advocacy does nothing to resolve that.
Okay, so what's the perm on the counter-advocacy?
The permutation is go through a process of conscientization. Conscientization is constant clarification of who we are. If I'll say that I maybe personally.
Right. I don't see how like the counter-advocacy also doesn't go through that process.
The counter-advocacy is not. This is a performative debate. We say that the way you debate in this round is a process of conscientization. The way you chose was through a method of exclusion framework, in a way that is just reappropriating our entire 1AC into a 20-second counter-advocacy text and just ignoring us.
Just ignoring you?
Yeah, you did not engage the 1AC. Where did you have any card number 1 about Asian Americans?
Okay, so I guess more of...
Or a debate specifically. All your commodification terms are in the context of a public, not this private debate.
Okay, so did you like make a perm on framework?
Yeah, I did.
Okay, what was the perm?
Go through a process of conscientization to engage in a plan-based debate.
Okay, so I guess what does that look like?
Also, Gmail card says that the reason Asian Americans are not able to politically engage is because they are in a sea of apathy. Conscientization is able to resolve that, and it's a prerequisite before we even become politically active.
Okay.
Cool.
Do you have enough for me to get a copy?
Yeah.
Cool.
I'm good. Let's see the flash here. You guys? Thank you.
Have you
Yes. The order is the counter-advocacy, then T in the case.
counter-advocacy T case?
Yep. Is anyone not ready? The counter-advocacy solves the whole case. They have no defense of their use of personal narratives and context of conscientization. We also consider how to make and change the world and how we can advance methodologies to liberate oppressed people at the bottom. Contention of the one, he sees a bunch of cards about how the historical interrogation of Korean people in Mexico and how that immigration and how exploring that process of immigration is necessary to develop an Asian consciousness within the debate space. The alternative agrees with that. They have no evidence that we have to specifically perform that or that we have to repeat that part of the 1AC. If that historical investigation is good, they've read solvency advocates for two completely unrelated parts of the 1AC. We've captured one of those solvency advocates, which is more than sufficient. 1AC cross-exit says that this was just their way of performing their methodology, but there's no terminal impact to any of these solvency deficits. They couldn't explain why the narrative was necessary or sufficient. So even the tiniest risk of net benefit is sufficient. Negative balance. They say that I'm a model minority. Leave me alone. You don't know me. You don't know what my experience is growing up as a minority in this house. And guess what? I don't want to talk about those experiences in a public place like this. The idea that I'm not engaging them because I'm not talking about my own Asian identity in the debate is patently ridiculous and proves the link argument to all of our case turns. It proves what happens to people within identity groups whose experience is different from the dominant one. Maybe my experience hasn't been the same as Centennial KK, but that doesn't mean that my experience isn't valuable to me. That doesn't mean that I'm not engaging them in the debate space. It only results in policing the boundaries of identity and forcing people to conform to dominant stereotypes. They say that, what have we done to perform this? Dylan will answer that argument. They say we don't break down the myth of the model minority. The 1AC did. This is a pick out of that portion of the 1AC. Dylan will also read a bunch of really good cards to legitimize that. They say we have to be accountable for things /conduit. That argument will also be in the one or the permutation. They don't get a permutation. Competing method debates can only occur in a world where mutual exclusivity is not the standard of competition. We have disadvantages to their performance that also would sever out of the narrative at the beginning of the 1AC, which matters even spatially. When you put the narrative at the beginning of the 1AC, it shapes the way that the rest of the 1AC as a speech act or as a strategy for resistance is interpreted by the people watching this debate. The idea that conscientization is only a personal process is not exactly true when there are dozens of people in this debate watching them. A lot of Asian people too who are thinking about how they interact with the debate space and how they interact with civil society writ large. The 1AC is supposed to be a process of conscientization for a bunch of different people, which proves that there are spillover effects to all of our case turn arguments. They say objective narration is a good thing and that we force objective narration. However, the idea that subjective narration is a good thing also relies on the underlying assumption that you can't narrate anything without having your own personal experience, which proves our policing arguments. Topicality, we're not going for this. It's not policing, nor does it contradict our case turns or counter-advocacy. They could have read the plaintext in Korean if they really wanted to. We just think there should be one resolutional stasis point that we should be able to engage over. It's a useful basis for engagement and improves the quality of debate arguments. However, we are negative when we don't really have to prove anything case. First, it's in the commodification term. When you perform autobiography, you become an intellectual commodity that you can market and create for the ballot. We should not assume that them winning ballots is successful at challenging the system that made them model minorities in the first place. If you vote for Centennial, it just means that they debate in the quarters. It also makes them content to dissent in the system while actively participating in it. We don't think this has a huge external impact, and the 2 seats probably right about a lot of those arguments. However, it doesn't mean that you can't talk about identity. Historical investigation is also a discussion of identity. The assumption that you can only talk about identity if you are using personal narrative and personal experience to discuss that is actively problematic, because what if you don't want to talk about your own personal experiences but still want to discuss your identity in the context of broader civil society? This part of the 1AC is just like straight up incoherent liberalism arguments. Autobiography is co-opted by liberalism. Form versus content is huge here. The form of their narrative determines its content. The way they told their stories to say, I learned ESOL then, I entered debate, and it was oppressive and silencing, but I found my way through it and I pulled myself up by my bootstraps. The notion of narrating oneself presumes an autonomous liberal subject that can narrate itself to a captive audience. It reinforces the idea that it's on the onus of the individual to do the decolonization. Here's some quotes from the 1AC. Michael described ESOL as an oppressive experience, but don't worry, he graduated from it. He got better at the activity. He gained success. Debate turned him into a model minority because of this, but he's an individual, realizes this, and he as a liberal autonomous subject will give it back and engage through who he is, through his experiences. They chose this story to win debates and to persuade a captive audience. And 1AC cross-sects, they were like, the ballot should go to the team that did the better debating, which proves that their narrative and rhetorical choices were chosen to persuade a captive audience. It feels with sense of justice and remedy through the institution of the ballot. The solvency mechanism is to vote for a minority team that refuses to conform to debate norms. That's the classic liberal heroic story. There's an individual hero that needs saving. The plot and the characters they focus on all present cultural values that the audience already holds. Those cultural values rely on a sense of liberal justice. By conferring authority onto the ballot to intervene in and remedy their grievances, they produce a model of the self which is ultimately dependent on the power relations that they claim to subvert. The community created their feelings of victimhood, yet they still turn to it for remedy. That turns the whole case, because the problem with modern legal theory is that it's too liberal. The law seems a neutral playing field where anyone can gain success by lifting themselves up by their bootstraps. The necessity of remedy through the law of debate are the same values that resulted in model minorities in the first place. Traditional liberal values mean that everybody has a fair shot. Individuals control their own identity, which means we assume the people who do better are inherently just better. This is why colorblindness is a dangerous concept. When Jews succeed and black people don't, it's not our job to rectify the historical injustices or go through the process of conscientization. If I'm an autonomous liberal subject, then I'm divorced from the history of any racial category. It doesn't question why group difference exists in a structure in the first place. It's always the fault of the victim. The logical 1A response is probably they contest the idea of model minorities, but form versus content is important. The form of a narrative assumes an autonomous liberal subject, which proves that they are ultimately ineffective in challenging the conceptions of a model minority. They read cards about the leaders of a beautiful struggle. This argument is not visibility or that somebody specifically will co-opt you, but rather that you co-opt yourself by narrating your own experience. I explained that argument above. The experience of Dave Deborah and Lawrence was also different because they weren't challenging the myth of the model minority. Our turns case arguments are specific to the 1AC. They say that silence is not the answer. We are not silent. We have a counter-advocacy. They say who co-opts us. That the argument is not necessarily that debate co-opts you, but rather that you co-opt yourself. They extend the Scott evidence to answer this narratives persuasive arguments. Yes, narratives are persuasive, but you manipulate them to be persuasive in a specific way. It's a liberal notion of what is persuasive in the first place. However, our Scott evidence has the idea that in order to expose oppressive structures, I need to use personal experience. For why that's true collapses politics into only the personal. No challenge can be made to the authority of their experience. It comes from a source outside one's cross-sex. 1AC cross-sex was or outside one's own experience. In 1AC cross-sex, this was kind of ridiculous when they were just like, you should say that our narrative is bad. How would I do that? Would I say that he didn't learn ESOL, that he wasn't successful at debate? Both of those things are obviously not true. We have to either say you don't hurt or that you shouldn't hurt. The only way to expose hierarchies is through a relation of experience to an audience, which means if you don't have personal experience or oppression, you can't engage in resistance. There are those within minority communities who benefit from systems of power. There are minorities whose stories don't conform to that of people in their particular social group. Those people are just castigated and ostracized for being inauthentic in a model minority. This results in self-policing. If you're Asian and you felt that their narrative wasn't true for your identity, your experience is therefore invalid because you didn't conform to the dominant narrative of oppression. If you only focus on personal experience of oppression, you don't focus on why that oppression exists in the first place. If the experience is the only way to challenge oppression, how do you challenge oppression without the experience of oppression being there in the first place? Which also means that you can't form coalitions across different identity groups. They say conscientization is only an internal process. That's probably going to be the one here on the Scott argument. However, this proves solvency for the alternative because there's no reason they have to introduce this argument into a debate space where the negative has to disagree with them in order to develop their own sense of Asian identity. Their appeal to the experience of oppressed identity only reinforces the exclusion. Scott 91, the unifying aspect of extrinsic social activity, the outcome of experience with class groups over identity. Other subject positions are subsumed by setbacks. How some experience come more than other experience against homogenized and providing the common down to which class consciousness built comes to class identity, region structural relation that brings the fault of what is obscures the process of which class was conceptualized around may seem to be self structure to agency and mark that card agency. Lastly, extend the Butler argument. We have to say either you can't hurt or you shouldn't hurt. The way you judge that debate is their narrative wasn't good enough. If we read a counter-narrative, you say that our narrative wasn't good enough. That renders judgment on people themselves, which does psychic violence and link to all of their arguments. How can you genuinely develop an Asian consciousness if you lose this debate? I'm going to need you to finish your card. Is that okay?
Yeah.
That's 2 seconds. I guess.
Right. Let's first talk about this commodification argument. What's a commodity?
What's a commodity?
Yeah.
Honestly, it's kind of hard to define. Our evidence in the context of the app says that commodification of intellectual property is when you introduce
No, what is a commodity? Now what commodification is. What is commodity?
Well, we made an argument about commodification. So our argument in the context of the app is that the introduction
I'm
of
asking what a commodity is.
I know, but
what the process
I think
of
that this answers your
commodification
question
is.
better. Sorry?
What? Never mind, we're not getting anywhere. Let's talk about these arguments, these personal narrative arguments. You say that other people cannot relate to our personal narratives and that maybe some people do not want to expose their personal narratives, such as you, into this debate community.
Yeah.
Where do you have anything saying we don't want to expose our narratives?
What? You clearly do want to expose your narratives because
Then why
you did.
shouldn't we do that?
What?
You say that if other you say that
Because
other
we
people
were
may not want to.
dissents to your advocacy.
No. You say other people may not want to do it. Why can they choose not to do it, and we can choose
Because
to do it?
yeah, so we have 2 arguments. First, it's a reason that we have disads to your introduction of that and using that in a political manner. Second, is in 1AC cross-sex.
Can we talk about that? How do we use it in a political manner? How is conscientization a political manner?
What? Like, I guess everything is always already political, but the way that you interact with it and you say this is key to developing an Asian consciousness, we think that's ultimately an ineffective way to do that, especially in a space with a captive audience like this. The second link argument that I was getting to, though, is like, he said either you can say our narrative is bad or you produce your own counter-narrative. You called me a model minority because I didn't produce my own narrative in this debate. You clearly expect me to do this, and I don't want to.
That's not the argument which will be explained in the 1A argument.
Well, then you should have explained it better, but I don't think you get a second chance on that.
Where is this captive audience? Why is debate a public space?
Because we're in public.
Seriously, is there anyone in this room that is from the public who are not debaters?
Everyone's from the public.
Everyone's from the public.
Name one non-debater.
Like when you go up, when someone from the public comes up to you and asks you.
Why does it matter if they're debaters?
Wait, no.
These are intellectuals.
Debate is like it's a closed-off community filled with only debaters. Like if someone from the public came to you and asked you,
I think that argument directly contradicts all those cards about the LBS you read in the 2AC that say it does spill over.
Man, can you let me finish? If someone from the public comes up to you and asks you what is debate, then how do you explain to them?
What is debate? I mean, like, if you explain where you're going with this, I might be able to help you.
No, can you just answer that?
I can't help you if you don't tell me where you're going with it.
All right, then. Stop cross-sex.
Okay. Yeah. See over here. So could you finish this?
Yeah.
Card? I got to the word problem. So if you could just keep it there. The word problem. Sorry. You get that?
Yeah.
So it's going to be a little bit on the case here, and then yeah, it's good. But the problem isn't really solved. Working class experience and ontological foundation, working class identity, you use the big terms at the same time. A foundational status to what substitute women's or blacks are homosexual for working class as statements which are driven in dispute authenticity experiences, establish women's identity, people they difference as identity, women's direct legitimacy, women in history and shared experience of women literally equates the personal with the political. For the lived experience of women, seeing it's leading directly to the resistant opposition, the possible politics, etc. Risk on the pre-existing experience. The argument closes down into an inquiry with ways in which female subjectivity is produced, the ways in which agency is possible, the ways in which race and sexuality intersect with gender, the ways in which politics and urban experience, the ways in which my identity is contested or in mass, and the experiences occurred to women not by virtue of their womanhood, but traits of domination must be necessary to the cursive character of these experiences.
Cool. Okay, cool.
And they say we were inconsistent and should lose. We'll just go for one offensive argument called the dogmatism dissent, and instead of a place to test a variety of ideas or inconsistency arguments, turns debate into a place to dogmatically advocate for just one. This is a terrible education political model for impact first violence. Their insistence sticking to one argument is a worse colonizing mindset than inconsistency, the Inquisition, the city on a hill, the crusade, and the puritanical feelings of superiority are all examples of unwillingness to westernized colonizers to think inconsistently and question racist assumptions that justify colonization in the first place. Second Inquisition politics, their version of pedagogy privileges one particular vision, says anyone who disagrees or thinks critically from different perspectives can go to hell. This is violence to the indigenous people who do not fit cleanly in their totalizing description of the world. That's Brown 96. When confessing inquiry becomes something we should attach to an injury, paralysis within and prevent us from seeking or designing a status other in the conversion confessional discourse with the truth-bearing test is opposed epistemological universe not only regulates the confessor relative beyond the confessing individual can constitute regulatory truth about the identity of confessors are assembled into play as knowledge about the group. This phenomenon seems to undergird a range of recurring troubles from totalizing description, experience, confession, reinstated, unified discourse in which the story of greatest suffering becomes a true story of a woman in third education. Emerson argued that a foolish consistency to hobgoblin with little minds. If debate teaches us about political strategy, we have to learn about flexibility. We have to learn that flexibility is essential. We have to be willing to give up on failed tactics and embrace effective ones. Diverse one and see and a consistent to an army. So we have a demonstration of the flexibility of political thought. Their education is trench warfare. We teach guerrilla warfare, which is historically a much more effective anti-imperial and anti-colonial strategy. Turns their portable skills argument. Now some defense. We're not inconsistent. Everyone we set as part of one strategy in the debate and value debate like a game you play to win both teams want the ballot. If they don't, we'll happily accept it and then spend the next hour discussing red pedagogy and any other interpretation makes a debate about personal beliefs, which is impossible to judge because the whole debate is about unfalsifiable feelings and they're inconsistent too. The two AC in one era will emphasize different things and not a reason to restrict the team. At worst, it's the arguments against our all, and you've clearly performed our we've clearly performed our pedagogy in clashing over how we ought to direct and actualize conscientization. We've engaged the question on whether these particular strategies can help this process and default negative. There's an academic industry dedicated to proving political significance of the experience with the search for performance and the counter-advocacy just results in fronting counter authenticity to key to solve and just reinforce tribal stereotypes that we should avoid this. Ireland 2 experience has become a buzzword experience. It becomes a self-proud program and programmatic manifestos and has been listened to the ground from which microresearch resistance can be erected, lost in such a day has been constant with appeals to immediate experience as the ground for debate more to the state than epistemological foe has. However, laudable goals are written upon winning naturalization historically leave the door open so wide to a progressive politics to its retrieve tribalism experience has become the rallying call for new social movements whose experience is the ground of knowledge, the basis of essential standpoint of critical awareness. It is through this sharing of experience that the class can achieve self-consciousness, galvanizing and political action. The search for experience eventually becomes frenetic and naturalizing bodily experience creates more exclusion forms of fascist identity politics and prevents effective use of historization. This Ireland too in their visions here been ideological meditation by turning to the presumed anonymity of the experience. It is a criterion for the disruptive anti-hegemonic potential of the experience in the same tendency because such a criterion can lead to fetishization of material bodies, which starts as an attempt to account for a non-meditative locus of roots in the canon of as a bio somewhere a person's identity resides in physical characteristic of blackness or deafness or homosexuality. Attempt to ground groups is specified by appealing to something that is less historical product meditative constructed and immediately given natural entity assassin the essence of a Vulcan and virtually naturalizes what is set up to historians of different local resistance outside its discursive construction refi agencies and inherent attributive individual to move that natural category such as woman, black, white, heterosexual, homosexual, by treating them as a character, giving characteristics of individual. Also the danger of the immediacy of the experience falls through microfashion. The privileging experience is a self-evidence promotes fashion. That's Child 98. Fashion needs to be understood in its production of idealism and production of self-evidence or irresistible turning experience by privileging experience is a weapon against universalism. We are leaving open the question of what authorities experience authoritative experience itself the appeal to experience with unconstitutional evidence for historical difference of place and necessary task of his point and have the inferences establish how to operate and constitute subject, active metaphor, visibility, transparency, spiritual knowledge, the intervention, vision, and the direct apprehension of the word transparent object, seeing the origin of knowing it's come to dominate or thinking about identity so much that visibility or condition toward which accounts of difference from personal experience now aspiring to aspiration toward self-evidence and self-permanence experience. It means itself like this element. It's so transparent that it is without need of further argument its history. And all of our case turns to turn this argument should be analyzing the relationships between the plan and the advantages, not just the plan alone.
right, Stratford.
Which book do we have?
I'm not. I thought you all were timing.
So I started at 8 and it got to 6.
Because I don't think you took any before.
That's why
Are we using 8 or 10?
I think you used 2 minutes just now. So
Are we using
you
8 or 10?
should have 8.
we're using 10, so 8 is the
What? Yeah, I mean that's whatever he wants, right? 10.
And the invitation.
Yeah, whatever's in the invitation is what I say.
Alright. So he's not here.
Yeah.
Yeah, don't go with that feeling.
Alright. The counter-advocacy framework thinking. Alright, anyone not ready? Okay. The counter-advocacy doesn't solve any of the case because Stratford has not performed the breaking down of the myth of the monarchy. This is an independent reason why our narrative is often stands the myth of the monarchy office, because our narrative is one of how we break down the myth of the monarchy. We have the tradition of the leaders in the past example, our narrative of how we decide to perform is what's breaking that down. Their reading framework is internal contradiction. That's the misunderstood argument when we call you monarchy. Instead, your debating style is why you sound monarchy. Your internal contradiction, the arguments you made about how you can just take out performance just by agreeing with those are the logical whiteness, and that's the reason why you perpetuate this monarchy argument. This is not a personal indictment, but a reason why your debating style is inconsistent with your performance. The reason why you the counter at worst, this is the reason to actively reject the team because the Nazi and Queen's everyone's Conscientization said that whiteness uses internal contradictions to justify trying to subvert performances, or else at worst it's a reason that their counter-advocacy does not solve on performance or their method of Conscientization, because not going through Conscientization, the OCD evidence specifically indicate that Conscientization is a process where of social condition interrelate academic experience where you share your experiences with other people. It says that Asian Americans only led to real change once they share the experience with other people. The reason why our personal narratives are good and a reason why this is not enough benefit to the calculate. If we don't solve Conscientization, that means that the entirety of my mind is often more about evidence on that case. Now the conditionality arguments, the dogmatism this that does not lead to us, because all we're saying is that you can still disagree with us, just do it in a consistent manner. The different routes of this dogmatism argument, and also dogmatism, the dogmatism justification is the logical white supremacy, because the white supremacy try saying that we don't have the dogma, which is how we undermine and attack so teams and stats without a permutation. The text of the counter-advocacy is literally the same thing as the one C with different types of names, which is the reason why if the debate's about competing methodology, that means that our methodology Conscientization is still the one you vote for, and the reason why you voted for it, the reason why it doesn't solve the disconnected objective narration is also an argument why you don't solve this argument, because you do not perform the myth of the minority, you did not do the research with our OCD evidence as necessary to break this down, you did not read this affirmative, you did not perform in any single type of round, which these are all reasons why you cannot solve the framework arguments. This is an active attempt to exclude. This goes pairs well with the argument that they voted that they exclusively flip neg as a strategic option. The Nazi increasing evidence says that strategic call of blindness is used by white supremacists to justify this, and their active attempt to exclude us and try to subvert our fun discussion of competing methods is what the framework used to actively do this. This is something crowded when we discuss less about competing methods and about do unfold more. Now the case arguments, the top of the case arguments that they don't have a card in the conscience debate. That's why at the end of the debate you should prefer like Gregory and Alamo haven't ever said personal narratives is the only thing that leads to actual change, because personal narratives have the pathos appeal where audience was able to connect. That's the only thing that creates real change. The OCD evidence is specifically in the context of my personal experience is good, because Asian Americans share experiences with other Americans even in public spaces. And now the third framing is that debate is not a public space, so it's not commodification, because there is no one from there is not a single debater within this room, which is the reason why we cannot get commodified. The historical investigation arguments do not solve this argument because you did not do a historical investigation. You said that you could talk about your identity in other places. That's the reason. Even if you don't want to share your personal experience, you should have at least told about how your identity relates with the performance of the voice. The reason why. Now she said that the narration is a liberal subject. All these arguments about the liberal subject and the liberal autonomy is just liberal BS for how we try to silence us, because this is another logical. This is another logical whiteness. So Crenshaw Carter articulates this directly in the constant debate, because any sort of argument about personal opinions is trying to be supporting the debate. Now David the Brown code. We don't link to Brown's argument. That's outcome 2000. Brown argues that only organized around identity where Peter Payne's reminded identities are unemployable with certain ideas need to a political agenda. So that movements came to man. Strict essentialism plays it, and tribalism kind of identity would practice necessarily necessity to manage the political claim. Although one knows that identity is not real, we conceal the point identity in public domain. The way to display head-on knowledge. Now, not using a narrative means that we're subdued from nowhere. That is white supremacy, bad. Yancey 2005. And philosophy, the body self is racking and telling the profile is converse on one's race. Basically, we're told for every system we're known. The white philosopher presumes to speak for all of us. That's a slight mention of his or his race identity. The whiteness author to speak from nowhere. For everyone's empowerment, though one way is power, the only by becoming lost of self. Now, using layers lead to real social thing. Gregory Elmhide in 2001. On October 10, 1990, Stratford has by Congress wanted to charge the directly coming against it. Soon after it was written, everything claimed the language Western cause on. Before signing whatever go to liberation or Harvard's physical policy argument, quick goes to receive these items and committed country war. Actually, they cannot afford to deny access to such a powerful persuasive device. Our implication, the base of the call the narrative, because they utilize two non-traditional persuasive fidelity. One is pathos feeling, two is a rhetorical possibility that emphasizes personal application. Now, there are multiple definitions narrative, and they're all inescapable as being. This is the reason why we control union is because narratives and personal narratives are inevitable. Communicating scholars should evaluate narratives and around the function. Gregory Elmhide 2001. Narrative is central to the representation of personal memory, self-reference, collective evidence, such a reasoning, and the narration is scalable to language and cause and effects as a mode of thinking being. Communicating scholars evaluate narratives in terms of the function. Now, he says that we co-opted ourselves. This is not true. You have conceded the uniqueness arguments that we are co-opted already in the status quo, and that constant process of conscientization bring our narrative debate. The only way we bring down the derivative that we bring into is how we tear down the myth of the minority, which is not the entire myth of the minority's office. We have three implications. Narratives are coming out to see the Asian American of prejudice concealed, and the Asian Americans use justified of their pride. Now, finally, the Polson arguments that the evidence handle come out to the personal evidence says that loveliest debaters and performing debaters in the past that use that identity to create real social name, because that's the only way that they became attached to their performance and actually led to real social name. It's precisely examples like Derek, Davon, and the elder members of the Leopold will be responding, which is that we're the only ones to make over real change. They do not have an alternative, which is the reason why we control unionists for all the terms case arguments, and the reason why the alternative identity does not solve. Staying silent is not the answer, which is the reason why we need to bring our identity into debate to break down the myth of the minority.
Yeah, 7.5. Case T, counter-advocacy.
Ready? The narrative structure of the what is an enthymeme that only results in identity policing. To engage them, I have to disclose my own identity, which is violent and coercive in and of itself. It also results in self-policing, because what happens if my experience is different from them? The idea that the story of Michael Coup in debate is key to breaking down systems of oppression is patently false. The idea that to challenge oppression you need authentic experience is fundamentally problematic. My experience is discarded because it is not exactly the same against them. It lets them call me a model minority if I do not agree with them, which only results in policing in debate, which prevents minority coalitions from forming, and that contributes to the myth of the model minority itself. They've also conceded all of the liberalism arguments, so even if narratives are a good thing in the abstract, and we don't have one, even if we were inconsistent, and some of our debate practices result in the logic of whiteness. Their narrative was the story of Coup pulling himself up by his bro tank and showing everybody that he did it on his own. That's how model minority myths are created. People look at Latinos and blacks and say, why can't you be more like Asians and Jews? That is the myth of color blindness. It is the myth of an autonomous liberal subject who acts on his own, who succeeds despite all odds. So the law itself is colorblind, and a level playing field argument is its structures are what we should be focusing on, and we've performatively done that through through our counter-advocacy, which focuses on the structures of oppression which occurred to Korean people in Mexico. They've also conceded that narratives and the way that they interact in debates, which is more specific than any of their generic arguments, result in psychic violence because the judge has to vote against people themselves. When you say, I need to read a counter-narrative and when you see cross-sects or keep demanding me to disclose my identity in these debates, what happens when I do actually do that? Who do you vote for? Are you voting for me as a person? Was my narrative not good enough for you? Was it not sad enough for you? How can you make a decision between the two? The team that loses will always bear the brunt of psychic violence and become collateral damage for the whole thing. All these are conceded external impacts, and I'm not really sure what they have going on in the case besides Asian oppression, but they've conceded the link turn to the model minority argument. We have two external impacts that are psychic violence and internal links. They say that personal narratives result in change, sure, but not in the debate space because the negative has to disagree with them. That is the interlink to all of our psychic violence arguments. Their specific personal narrative results in social change in the wrong direction. They say that debate cannot be commodified because it's in a public space. They've already commodified it by picking specific arguments, by emphasizing different parts of the story, different characters, and a unique plot to make it more persuasive to a liberal audience, to a captive audience. That is the idea of the liberal subject, which proves our interlink arguments. They said that I should talk about identity and how my identity relates to performance. Quit telling me what to do. They keep demanding that my identity changes and that my identity comes up in the debate, and I just don't want to disclose that. They say they don't like to ground. I'm not really going for that evidence. They say view from nowhere. No, a historical investigation is not a view from nowhere. It's not the same thing as colorblindness because it recognizes the way that structures of reified oppression that occurs right now. Our liberalism arguments also turn this because their argument results in not more of a view from nowhere. That's what liberalism is. They say that narratives lead to change, but not in debate, because the only thing that occurs if you vote after is if the coups go to quarters. There's also we don't require the other. That doesn't mean that they should require narratives from us. They say narratives are inevitable, sure, but their narrative is a bad thing. They see leaders of a beautiful struggle use identity to create change. This is just like a double turn with all the arguments that conscientizations they sell is a self-sustaining process and it's for their own personal gain. If that's true, then their specific performance in debate was bad because it had an audience and there is a spillover for that. So we'll concede the implicit thesis between that. However, this does not mean that you can't talk about identity. You can talk about identity all you want, but it's the question of whether or not narrative should be part of your political praxis. We think that our counter-advocacy is superior in that regard. Topicality, it's not an attempt to exclude. It's an argument that the 1AC should be tied to resolutional action because it provides a point of contestation for the negative. You can use a narrative to justify it about Korean immigration in Mexico. You also don't even need to speak English. It just needs to have a point of clash that is contestable for the negative. Our argument was that results in better political praxis. I have no idea why that is exclusionary in any meaningful sense. It is a small limit on content, but it doesn't limit out form, which is what all of their evidence is talking about. Counter-advocacy, it solves the act. They have read several solvency advocates for their historical investigation of the of Korean people in Mexico. All of the debate is in and of itself a performance. So we've performed our politics. You can vote negative to reject the narrative structures of the 1AC, which also proves the permutations incoherent. They should not be able to sever out of that because they've conceded even spatially it shapes how you view the speech act of the 1AC. Therefore, our speech act was superior in a competing method debate. You should think about competition differently. They say we didn't solve because we didn't perform. Yes, but that demand for performance that is like theirs is bad because what happens if I don't want to perform like they do now? The conditionality of debate, topicality is different because you can still use narratives within it. Therefore, it's not a meaningful contradiction. The idea that just because some white supremacists contradict themselves and can slip between different identities doesn't mean that all contradictions are in and of themselves white supremacists. That's a logical fallacy. They've considered argument is more guerrilla warfare in modern politics. You need to learn about flexibility and different approaches and attacks on different arguments. That is pedagogically and educationally valuable, especially for resistance strategy
and more generally in a world that is just too confusing for us in the world of the internet and massive information processing arguments, which they concede to disadd to their interpretations links to them just as much. First, because permutations where they attempt to agree with us a little bit. Second, because it's key to fairness. The 2EC and the 1AR have a lot of latitude to change it up, which also allows them to slightly contradict themselves. They contradict themselves in a bunch of different places, by the way. For example, when they say this is only about the debate space, and then red cards about LBS spilling over, so that is that's a moot point. They say the conscientiousness is it's about sharing experience. Last argument they've conceded is that you don't have to do this in a debate round. You just talk to other people. That's solved.
Yep.
Yeah, it is. Well, it says one in our Octas. Well,
Yeah. Yeah. They know. Or how much prep is that?
240.
Yeah.
Oh, that they want it.
Yeah, I think it's, well, I think it's both sides.
Cool. Oh, perfect. Pretty easy. Don't already get it?
Yeah.
Which team? Jump in. No problem.
All right. Case counter-advocacy. Here is the framing issue of the round. Since the 1 and C, the negative team has agreed that the process of conscientization is a good thing, whether or not we attain that, or the negative team that is the only question. However, the personal narratives are good. The negative does not have one card about debate or one card about Asian conscientization, and why using our personal identity as me and Michael and Gabriel will stop our process of conscientization, internal process. They just have the identity politics, and using our narratives are bad in debate. That does not stop the process of conscientization, which is the ultimate impact in the round. And saying that Bentley is able to solve for the oppression of Asian Americans because we expose the myth of the model minority. We are invincible in the status quo, and we are always said when we speak out, people say that our identity is not good enough, our identity should not be evaluated in the debate, and that we, because we're going to start policing ourselves and not talk about it. This leads to the continued psychological violence of Asians, which we are trying to break down through a process of conscientization. Now let's start with the debate portion. And Gregory Alma said the narrative provides a voice for the disenfranchised. Without it, you are left in the cold, and the debate committee becomes largely unaware. If I never speak out of how will people know about what I go through, without the narrative, the system will continue to believe that nothing is wrong because I have no substantial proof. Now we create a rhetorical possibility that does not occur, that create a parallel chain of debate. The narratives are inescapable because they are effective who we are. Limiting our narratives, limiting our identity debate, which they try to contest. Now, here's another framing issue. They have not studied or extended a piece of evidence in D2, which means that you should not call for any of the culture and let the rhetoric of the culture persuade your culture, specifically in the context of debate, which none of them are just theorizing about legal crap. Now, let's talk about the Asian portion. Osajima card specifically says that when other Asians look at the plight of other Asians, they become, they gain the pace, they gain the motivations to start breaking out the myth of the model mind, to conscientize and gain a critical conscience in the status quo. You're not using our identity, not exploding, just leaves it in the hole and just reifies the status quo where we don't talk about anything in the debate space. Asian Americans do not go through conscientization. Not using our personal identity means that we use our personal identity to go through a process of conscientization. They do not go into the line by line, go into the line by line. First, he says that identity politics is self-policing because it's different. There's a fundamental uniqueness that you have continued throughout the debate. We are already co-opted. Identities are already inescapable. Identities are inevitable. Personal narratives are in everyone that are whatever we do is already co-opted because we are already talking about because Asian Americans are not in the discussion. There's only a risk that conscientization is able to resolve the difference. Also, your experience is not discarded just because we take your experience does not mean that we disagree with you or you have to be voted down because a disagreement leads to a discussion where we say that Asian oppression should be discussed about it invisible. Just because you say our feelings are hurt and does not mean that you should exclude our narrative. What are saying? This is the white liberals saying that we should not talk about you because you might backlash against yourself or that you might hurt our feelings. This is a bad form of debate that leads to exclusion that you should not. They say that narrative is a story of heroes. No, it's not. The hero story is what the myth of the model minority is, which they have conceded throughout the debate. We are the hero of us becoming a model minority, pulling us from the bootstrap and doing well, and then breaking that down by reading the affirmative saying that no, we are not going to be that model to the community. We will go through a process of conscientization and break that down. It's the exact opposite of what their argument is saying, which means only we self-learn. They say that structure that we call psychological violence of people who get shot down. What's the alternative to that? Staying silent? That Crenshaw card says that if we do not speak about it because people's feelings will get hurt, that only allows whiteness to continue because we never chance the rhetorical imperialism that is going on. Is that also just because we disagree with you? Is that also this is a question about the method? Just because they vote you down, it was a question of method. It means that your method was bad, not your own personal narrative to gain that method, which was the framing issue of the debate. You should not vote us down because our narrative is bad, but because our method is bad, which the negative fundamental has not proved. They say we don't create changes because negative has to agree. We may go through a process of conscientization. Just because you disagree doesn't mean we have a discussion in critical concept. They say we get commodified. No, we don't. Who does the commodification? This is an internal process that they cannot come on. They say identity does not narrative bad does not mean our identity bad. This is BS because all their cards are in the context of how identity politics in debate identity politics is bad. We do that through the narratives and there is particular time they say historical implication solves. No, it's not. Also, Jim McCarthy says especially Asian Americans have to go through a process of conscientization and name the whole word. Historical interrogation is how we connect to a topic and know where to do it. They say we will only go to quarters. Dude, this is basically saying that minorities cannot go to and win debates because we will talk about conscientization. Just because we win is not reason to vote us down. Conscientization. They do not solve for this because they do not perform. The Osajima says you does not say historical interrogation enough. You must know who you are. You must perform your identity, read your narratives, and understand your place in the world in order to solve it. Just by reading a 15-second planting, all them reappropriating our 1AC and using the logical whiteness, trying to skirt our discussion away. They're just like, oh, we are able to solve through this counter-advocacy that we read in the 1AC and not actually engage our affirmative that we have to. Now, this is impacted by the LBS evidence, the polling card, which says what? Which leads to it. Now, the Elvis is not a contradiction in the debate space because we take the skills we learn from the private and take it to the public.
Centennial, can you put it out together? I'm at least interested in the 1AR part, the Crenshaw part. Like, you can just put you can put everything in one document.
Anything you think is relevant?
Yes. Like I said, just flag the Crenshaw part. That's fine.
Quigley, are you going to need anything? Do you have a speech?
I got everything. Go ahead. Go do what you're